Sometimes face recognition just doesn't work on
Oh,
phones
no.
anymore.
No. So we do it with a mask on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, is everybody ready? Okay. I call to order the Board of Education meeting of August 24th, 2020 at 7:00 p.m. To start, I'm going to do a roll call of Board of Ed members because we have some present with us here and then some who are participating virtually. Karina Drake. Not yet. Liz Flogel. Liz? Oh. Can you guys hear us? Oh, there you are. There. Hi, Karina. Okay. Liz? All right. Looks like she's there, but we'll come back to her. Nora Gatos?
Present.
Kathleen Holes?
Here.
Rachel Jerry?
Here.
Sean McAvoy?
Here.
Ken Schoberg?
Here.
And Jonathan Steckler?
Here.
And Margaret Stamatis? And we'll come back to Liz.
Hey, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, thank you. Sorry. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our website. Members of the public have the ability to watch this meeting through the live stream on our Board of Education website and YouTube channel. Regarding public comment will be submitted in writing through a link which is open and available on our Board of Education website as a pop-up. It just went live. It will be open from now until the point in our meeting where we get to the part of the agenda, which is correspondence to the board. Written comments will be read aloud by Vice Chair Jonathan Steckler. All right, moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is the reports. Chair report. My last report was a couple of months ago on June 22nd. Obviously, a lot has happened since then. We've also had a lot of board and committee meetings throughout the summer, a lot more than we typically would have. There's obviously been a lot of work that's been ongoing. I've continued to be on weekly webinars with CABE and other board chairs multiple times a week just to share information about what's happening throughout the state. Obviously, all districts are facing some similar situations, although we're all dealing with it individually with what works best locally. But it's definitely been very, very helpful to hear what other boards and other chairs are doing in other districts. I think Dr. De Silva will talk about the new teacher orientation and convocation, but we're happy to have our teachers back, and we're looking forward to welcoming our children back to school in a couple of days. For board members, we are also trying to set up a committee meeting schedule, so thank you all for getting back to us, and we'll be getting out to you soon with what that will look like. On to the superintendent's report.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another board meeting. I think it's the first one of this school year. So starting off, I know that everyone is hearing about what's happening with the Danbury Public Schools, and I'll share more about that when I speak of the reopening plan a little bit later tonight, as we're watching that closely. As Ms. Tamanis had shared, we did have our new teacher orientation this past week, actually just about a week and a half ago, where they joined us, the first selectman, Ms. Tamanis, some other board members at Scotts Ridge Middle School. They started off their day with finding out a little bit about the Ridgefield community and how this community is incredibly supportive and fulfilled with the arts and many other riches. Then after that, they had opportunities to work in their schools alongside their teammates. We had our administrator retreat as well, where we brought all of our administrators back to East Ridge Middle School, where we went through a day of professional development for ourselves and how to support our faculty as we welcomed them back on August 19th. They came back either physically or virtually to a convocation. I opened up the convocation alongside Ms. Tamatis and Lori Peck, our Teacher of the Year. It was a great event. We actually have recorded it, and eventually we'll put that up on our website. And I think that's it, even though it seems like it was short, there's a lot going on in the Ridgefield Public Schools.
Great, thank you. Next report, Finance Committee Chair, Jonathan Seckler.
Finance Committee met a week ago, Monday the 17th, and we received and discussed an update on the administration's review of the district bank accounts, including a few suggested action items. On the special revenue and donations account, the recommendation, which received general agreement from the committee, was to break that into two accounts, open a second account for donations, as donation process to the student activity manual, and rename the old account to the athletic fund for further review, and I'll come back to the committee as a full item to discuss the athletic fund itself. State grants, there was no, I'll only go to the ones where there were recommended changes. The impress fund, we had a lot of discussion about, and we didn't really have an agreement on the suggested actions, because we have the majority of the activity there is pass through, which doesn't fit the impress name, but to not have it pass through raised some questions about whether that reduced the level of control. So that's going to come back for further discussion. Building rental, it was recommended that we update the fee schedule, and that shouldn't have much of a balance when we update the costs and the fees to match, so we keep the balance low, and that'll as well come back as a further conversation, the building rental account as a whole. And then the last one, the student activity accounts, where the majority of the action was. The recommendations were to create a general activity fund ledger account to use and process as part of the student activity manual. Update policies 3453 to include 3453.1 requiring the graduating class to take or donate their available funds upon graduating. This currently is practice, but it's not part of the policy. Close the high school savings account to move those funds into the general activity fund ledger account for the high school, and review and move all general operating fees collected to GL and out of the student activity accounts. And finally, to create a student activity manual to include the year-end processes for all these accounts. So those three items, the student activity account, the building rental account, and finally the athletics fund, will come back as separate items on the further agendas.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item on our agenda. We have quite a few meeting minutes to approve. Do I have a motion regarding the meeting minutes of May 11th, 2020? Jonathan, go ahead. I move that we approve. Go ahead.
I move that we approve.
The meeting minutes of May 11th, 2020. Do I have a second? Sean? Okay. Any discussion or comment? Liz, we can't see your image, so if you have anything to say, can you just make sure you say it? Anyone? Okay, so let's go to a vote on the meeting minutes of May 11th, 2020. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Liz, Do you approve of the meeting minutes?
I'm in favor.
Thank you. Okay, so that's unanimous, that's 9 in favor, thank you. Okay, do I have a motion regarding approval of the meeting minutes from May 26th, 2020? Nora? You can just say so moved. Do I have a second? Kathleen? Okay, any comments or discussion? Okay, let's move to a vote then. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from May 26, 2020, please raise your hand.
I
Thank you, Liz.
am raising my hand.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that's unanimous as well. Those meeting minutes passed. Do I have a motion regarding the meeting minutes from June 8th, 2020?
So moved.
Sorry, Ken, thank you. Do I have a second? Nora? Okay, any comments or discussion? So hard to try to put your hand. Okay, so let's go to a vote. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from June 8th, 2020, please raise your hand. Or say aye.
I'm raising my hand.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, moving on to the next. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 15th, 2020? Anyone?
So moved.
Nora? Okay, do I have a second? Sean? Any discussion or comments? Okay, let's move on to a vote. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from June 15th, 2020, please raise your hand. Or say aye.
Aye.
Great. That approved unanimously again. Thank you. Cheryl, good job on this.
No, good. I abstained, okay?
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So it was 8-1. It was an abstention from Karina. Thank you, Karina. Okay. Meeting minutes. Do I have a motion regarding the meeting minutes from June 18th, 2020?
I move that we approve the meeting minutes for June 18, 2020.
Okay. Kathleen, do I have a second? Jonathan? Okay. Any comments, discussion? Okay, we will move to a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3.
This is Liz. I'm abstaining from this one.
Okay, so I have 6 yeses, abstentions, I think is Liz, Margaret, and Karina. None of us were there. So those meeting minutes pass. Thank you. All right. Moving on to the next item on our agenda. Update on the reopening of schools. Dr. De Silva.
All right, so back at it. This is where we spent every day, every moment is the planning and thinking and processing. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we're not working in isolation. And so what we've had the benefit of doing over the course of really since we started this mid-July is working alongside the reopening steering committee, the subcommittees, and then our local health director, Ed Briggs, our medical advisor, Dr. Ahern, Aaron Crook, and again, using the guidance and or the requirements that come to us from the State Department of Ed. So we have many folks here that will answer questions around the reopening, but we're planning on just giving you an update from the last time we met, which was August 6th. Unfortunately, but fortunately, when school was not in session, we did have our first case of COVID, where we had our first run at a couple of the protocols, the communication and the contact tracing protocol. During that time, we were in contact, we were made aware over the weekend, we were in contact with our first selectman, again with our local health director, Mr. Briggs, with Dr. Ahern, with Aaron, with myself, with Ms. Dewing, with Dr. Hanaway, with Joe, and anyone else, Dawn, anyone else that needed to be a part of that process. And through that, we learn, right? And we learn how to be better at things and communicating as clearly as possible. But I do think that we did a good job of coming together collaboratively and processing all the different pieces in this particular situation. So we had our first run there, unfortunately, but again, thankfully, school wasn't in session. Over the past weekend, we've heard a lot about Danbury and the Danbury Public Schools, and you probably heard by now that the superintendent there did make a decision to run remote at the start of the school year. They were running hybrid from the beginning, you may also remember, due to the nature of the size of their schools and the capacity. That said, again, over the weekend with those same individuals, or at least parts of those individuals, we were collaborating around what the impact was, if anything, on our school system, and I'll turn it over to Erin in just a moment, both our nursing director and our COVID liaison. This morning, we communicated with Mr. Briggs, with Erin, Dr. Hanaway, Ms. Dewing, myself, Dr. Ahern, and based on addendum 4 from the State Department of Education, also part of our reopening plan, we looked at the Connecticut State Department of Education guidelines, we looked at the data that was available to us that becomes available every Thursday, and at this time, there was no recommendation to change our reopening plan for this Thursday. So things will continue exactly as they were designed, unless something or someone tells us that we need to come back and collaborate and think of another factor that we haven't possibly thought of. So Erin, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I think that was beautifully said. We're relying on recommendations from the Connecticut Department of Public Health and the Connecticut State Department of Education, who have identified leading and lagging indicators to help us determine what's statistically significant in terms of COVID within our community. So as you are all probably already aware, the leading indicator is the new cases per 100,000 population on a 7-day rolling average. And that number is taken county-wide. Fairfield County has approximately 1 million residents, about 940,000 residents. So state epidemiologists have told us that an individual town's numbers may go up or down, but what they're really looking at is how it is throughout the population. So we do know on Saturday, Danbury had 44 confirmed cases of COVID. I believe around 20-ish on Friday, and then most of the summer they were cruising around 5 or less cases per day. So they had a significant uptick. The Department of Public Health did issue a specific piece of guidance just for the city of Danbury, and we clarified that with Ed Briggs today in terms of whether there was anything we needed to think about affecting perhaps employees that work for Ridgeville Public Schools that live in the town, city of Danbury, and how that would affect their employment with us. Mr. Briggs confirmed that that alert did not pertain to that type of an issue of those folks coming down to work here. So as Dr. De Silva pointed out, we're focused on the leading indicator of new cases per 100,000 population over 7-day rolling average. Those numbers are published every Thursday. The current number right now for Fairfield County is 3.28, so we're still low. If it gets up to 10, that would support a hybrid model, which we're already going to be starting in to begin with. So I think that we're definitely safe and in the clear. The reason that these numbers are given is that statistically, from an epidemiological and public health standpoint, we can assume that if we have a symptomatic child or staff member in our school building during the day who's presenting with symptoms of COVID, because of the statistical significance of these numbers, we can assume that that case is not going to be a COVID case, because we know in the population the COVID is very low. Once we get up to 25, that number hits 25 on the 7-day rolling average of cases per 100,000, we can no longer safely assume that if we have a symptomatic individual in a school building, that that's not a COVID case. At that point, we have to start assuming that it's probably COVID. And that's the difference, and that's why the state has chosen those benchmark numbers for us to depend on. We had a great meeting with the school nurses this morning. All of the school nurses and nursing subs gathered in the cafeteria at Barlow. We went over all of the return to school protocols, and the nurses are going to be prepared and ready to answer questions to staff members and teachers in their buildings. We feel confident and prepared. We have the personal protective equipment that we need. We have the protocols. We have our guidance. And we've got a great relationship with Dr. Ahern in town and Ed Briggs, and we are ready to go.
So just to add one last point to that, as a result of our conversation today, we've now established a weekly protocol that we will communicate as a collective team every Friday since the numbers come in Thursday. So if there's any decisions that need to be made as a result of that new information, on Fridays, Dr. Ahern, myself, Mr. Crook, Ms. Dewing, Dr. Hanaway, And Mr. Briggs will communicate every day at 12, every Friday at 12:30, just to be sure that there isn't any information that would require a shift in our plan. And if we receive that information, of course, we'll make that shift. And so they are our guides, along with the state guidance and requirements, and anything that we may receive intermittently from the State Department of Ed. Okay. So in addition to that, happening as of August 6th, we did have our teachers arrive on August 19th. And as I described in my opening letters to opening letter to teachers, with teachers comes life to any work that we do. So we did a lot of planning alongside our steering committee this summer. But at the same time, we know that when teachers get into the classrooms, they look at each piece that we may have created in support of colleagues, because we did have teachers on our reopening committee, but they bring that to life in a developmentally appropriate way. So very soon after our teachers arrived, we had a couple of challenges or problems that we needed to solve for. One of which, and this wasn't at every level, but for consistency purposes, one of which was having, on the first day, students in the physical world and having students in the digital world. And part of the reason that teachers were apprehensive about that is they felt that they really needed to tend to the children that came to school physically. And quite frankly, we did receive feedback from parents about that early on, asking us to think if there was a way in which we could try to modify the day. And so it was clear that when teachers arrived, that they felt that, and it depended by level and it depended by content area, but that they felt that they really needed to tend to the children on the first day that they were there physically. And then the opposite would happen on the second day. So the children that were remote would have an asynchronous experience and not live experience, and they would be able to tend to the children that were there. So that shift happened K-12, and we communicated that out. I communicated that out to families on Friday. And so our children that are not engaged in the physical experience will have asynchronous opportunities that will be video pre-recorded so that they can access. And some teachers may have small little videos and things like that that they will have created personalized to those students. So that was a change. The other change, or what came with that, is that teachers also felt like over the course of the 6 days, we did a lot of planning. As we said in our reopening plan, health and safety protocols. Mr. Crick just mentioned that now with the nursing staff arriving. All of that, PD around technology, which was well done, I think. It was overwhelming to teachers because there was just so much that they had to learn across the 6 days. And they wanted time to plan with their colleagues. And so we made some modifications within the schedule to allow for that and to also allow for opportunities to practice some technology. And I think that those 2 days at the start of the school year will also give them that shift. And that was actually feedback that we received from the teachers union as well. And so we made that shift. We made some shifts with the technology PD, giving teachers more opportunities to practice with the webcams. Some of the teachers, their webcams arrived later in the day, so they didn't have as much opportunity. We are still putting up, as you know, in our middle school, we did not have the technology boards that we needed to provide that experience for the temporary remote learners and the digital remote learners. So some of those boards are still being put up, and we're moving as quickly as we can. But there were a lot of boards and a lot of classrooms. So despite the fact that we got them on time, getting them up was another challenge. Facilities, and I see that Joe is on the line, has been hard at work with all the prep that they typically do, as you know, for the start of the school year, but with the added layer of plexiglass, PPE equipment, making sure that the sanitizers are in the classrooms and the bathrooms, making sure that the signage is up. There's a significant amount that has to be done. It's not just the signage on the wall, it's the signage on the floors, it's the arrows, there's just a lot. And what we do know is that visuals matter, because they're good reminders, in particular for students and children, that they need it. They need to hear it, they need to see it. We've been doing walkthroughs of the buildings, and that's still an area of growth, I would say, between now and when the children arrive on Thursday, is making sure that we have plenty for them to visually see, to remind them of the protocols. So big thanks to Joe and his team. Just, this weekend on Saturday, they were here cutting plexiglass, having it delivered, prioritizing the needs for the faculty that have particular accommodations and or the classrooms that need because they don't have the ability to socially distance, need plexiglass there for the start of school. So a big thanks to Joe and the folks in facilities. CIAC is serious whiplash, and it's every time I write something, I feel like I just want to delete it. But the reality is we're back at it. We received an announcement over the weekend that our students are able to begin reconditioning again. So before I could even announce that to families, thankfully Dane Street, who's on the line, did communicate that out to families. We should receive another update by the end of the week. I know everyone's working hard and information is coming at a rapid pace, so a big thanks to our families. And I can imagine that for kids, it's probably emotionally challenging, right? They yes, no. So, and depending upon the sport, so I can imagine that they themselves, who are pretty invested in their academics and their athletics, that this is an uneven time, but we certainly thank them, and as always, more to follow. Ms. Dewing will talk about staffing a little bit later, but I would say that early on, we thought it would be a challenge, but it seemed to be a little bit more settled. And as of recent, we're certainly seeing a change in staffing. And so we have received a number of retirements, a number of resignations. I anticipate that will actually continue to happen this week. And so even with our goal in hiring additional substitutes for each school, building-based substitutes that are part of the structure and part of the school culture, we will be hiring others at least temporarily to fulfill some of the positions that we're losing right before the start of the school year. So without a doubt, that's going to be a challenge, and Carol will speak more to that in a minute. We received addendum 8, which I will share with families on Friday in my weekly communication. We received that probably just about an hour and a half ago, and that's actually the addendum that supports and provides guidance around safety protocols in schools, fire drills, lockdowns, etc. Haven't had time to read it, but if you saw it out there, that's just came. We closed out our temporary remote learning option for parents late last night. As of right now, we have 675 children that will be participating remote only. So that means in our model, that's 5 days. Just as a reminder, we do not have the Wednesday cleaning day at this point because we didn't need that in a low-risk scenario. So we have 675 children that was closed out last night. Families that want to make that shift, we ask at least for 72 hours notice if they want to go back one way or the other. As you can imagine, for our faculty, no different than tonight, right? Who's here, who's not here, who's joining late, who's not joining late. We want to really allow them as much preparation time as possible. So for any changes, parents will need to notify their school principal to make that shift. We have 1,475 students approximately that are not taking the bus, but 675 of those 1,475 are the temporary remote learners. So cumulatively, we have about a little bit under 1,500 students that are not accessing busing. And so you're probably asking whether or not we could reduce the number of buses. I've said this before, at any time, any one of those children or all of them could come back to accessing a school bus. So we have to have the school buses available. And so based on our contract, we access so many buses per school year. If we were to reduce those number of buses, let's just say, and then say, no, sorry, we want 2 of those back, we may not be able to get those back. And so unfortunately, while it does help for the purpose of reducing the number of children on a school bus for cohorting purposes, it doesn't really help us financially. The one area that it could help us in, and it will help us in, is the need for bus monitors. So that's that. We distributed about, or planning to distribute about a little bit over 1,200 Chromebooks so far. There may be some families, I think at the elementary level, that I think we'll need to dig in a little bit deeper because there may be a misperception or perhaps a miscommunication on our part. The Chromebooks will be transferred by children to and from school. And so for parents who may have thought, yeah, we have our own device at home, they may have not realized that their first grader is going to be taking that computer in their backpack and to and from. And so I don't know if that will change a parent's position on whether or not they're going to need the Chromebook. So we're hopeful that it doesn't change significantly so that we're well prepared for them at the start of the day. But I imagine that some families may choose a district option as opposed to their own. But as of right now, we're distributing a little bit over 1,200, and we have one more day in which to do that. So they've been hard at work, the technology department. Again, some of the challenges, we have the boards, we have the new webcams, and then we have the distribution of the Chromebooks. We did receive, I believe, on Thursday or Friday, our allocations for the coronavirus relief funds. So what's interesting about this, in the spirit of transparency, we were asked in July, I think it's July 17th, to identify what our best guesstimates were of our costs. You actually may have seen that across, in the newspaper, across districts, what their anticipated costs were. I think initially we were somewhere around 1.5, 1.6. They asked us to revisit it, to give them new estimates. I think we were closer to 2.5. And then we received this allocation. The majority of this allocation, ironically, is the way in which the state outlined it is into transportation. And so what that actually means, looks like, what the grant application is going to look like isn't clear yet. And quite frankly, I think there is some concern about how these allocations were identified, because it doesn't seem, they're not necessarily based on Title I, or at least it doesn't appear to be so far. It doesn't seem to be lined up to a particular need that was more significant than others. So for example, our transportation bus monitor request was not at the highest cost we had. We had far higher costs, for example, in PPE or facilities, but yet we received nothing for those particular items. So this is something that right now, that's the allocation we received. All they gave us was our allocation and which lines it would fall into. But beyond that, that's all we have. So I think that's the highlights of reopening since the last time we met. I do want to really thank the efforts of our 12-month employees and our teachers that have come back. And I know it's challenging, there's no doubt, there's a lot of information. And for us, we've been embracing it all summer. This has been part of just the air we breathe all day long, all summer long. And the ping pong part of it is just part of what we've experienced, and I've just learned to know that that's the way this is going to roll this year. But our faculty hasn't, and yet they've come back to work, smiles on, devoted. If you go into some of these classrooms, it's amazing how much they've done over the course of these 3 days. And so incredibly proud to be a part of the Richfield Public Schools alongside these teachers that have just jumped right in, acknowledging, I know, that it's a lot of information, it's not easy, but kudos to them, and we're thankful that they're here, and hopefully no one else leaves. And that's it. That's it for me. So I'll take questions.
I'm sure a lot of questions are on the table, so
Sure.
we can even go around. Jonathan, I saw your hand
One
first.
quick question. A lot of the districts nearby have recently changed their start date, pushing it out a week to right after Labor Day. What were the discussions here around that topic, and why did we decide not to go somewhere?
So all of these discussions happened early on. So there are districts that are starting around our time. We have New Canaan, I believe, that's starting August 31st. We have Middlebury, Southbury, I think they're starting Friday perhaps, and their staff is returned. So there's a couple of variables that are different. At the time in which, and I don't believe anything is really different for us right now, but at the time in which we have our calendar set, we elected to remove 2 professional days during the school year in lieu of reducing the school year for children. So some school districts have reduced the school year from their 180 or 181 days or 182 and reduced it to 177. We felt committed to having children in school and having experience for learning as much as possible. So that's where, let's just say, 4 days in theory, right, could have been removed from student days and perhaps added to staff days. So that was an option. Still, the advice that we're getting is to get students into school as early as possible, prepare them as best as possible for the unknown that we don't know will happen in a couple of months or a month and a half. We pushed our professional development earlier. So some school districts are just starting their professional development, so they need those 6 days. Students won't be there, but staff will. Where we had our faculty return earlier, so our faculty returned on the 19th. At this time, there wouldn't be a reason to make that shift. In other words, our faculty has 6 days of professional development. We would not be able to increase that professional development without reducing the calendar for children. And there does not appear at this time to be a reason to do that. The only reason would be to give teachers the benefit of perhaps having more time to manipulate the technology. And that was, again, one of the shifts that we made for our teachers being able to be with their physical kids on that Thursday and Friday, so that we didn't need to make that shift. So that's primarily the reason, and it's just where their calendar started, really, and how they allocated their professional days. Thanks. Dora.
I'll kind of piggyback on Jonathan a little bit. I'm going to try and speak loudly, but I do want to thank and acknowledge the administrative team and the reopening committee for all of the amazing work you've done, for sure, for many, many months. But I do think the extra week would be huge, and I think it would be a small price to pay in the grand scheme of things. I feel like I've spoken recently to teachers at all 3 levels, and there's no doubt in my mind that they all want to come back. They want to teach. Teachers want to teach. But with everything going on in the community, around us, seeing what's happening in college campuses that are opening too fast, too soon, I think that another week would be a huge breath of fresh air for teachers. Teachers have so many questions, and they're not all being answered. And it's not only about technology, it's about safety, it's about daily expectations, it's about protocols with students, staff, and parents. The questions are not being answered, and maybe no one knows the answers, but then if that's the case, we can't rush to open. And I think that the fact that teachers have already come back in isn't really a reason not to delay, because in fact, coming in and sort of seeing what they're up against, seeing what the reality of their classrooms looks like, their modified school spaces, the drastically changing schedules, and the technology, now we'll have time to process and plan and really welcome students ready. I mean, I truly feel that we're sending our teachers into battle without the knowledge and the preparation and the emotional and physical well-being to truly be successful.
It's, again, I mean, my gosh, the committee has been fabulous, and all the communication, and as she keeps calling it, the flip-flopping and all the different. I think I mentioned this about a month ago at one of our meetings, is rather than delay the start of school, and I brought it forth, and I still think, the more I'm hearing about other schools waiting, it's not waiting, but having the first week or 2 be synchronous for all students, and then ease it back in, because that way, it's sort of splitting it in many ways. It's giving the teachers those times without having little kindergartners, 1st graders, 12th graders in their classroom, and being able to really go through it and prepare their classrooms more and more and see where the glitches are on the online learning, and then have people back. I know the downside of that is, by the time we're ready to have the children come back, things may have changed in the communities at large, and then the children will not get in. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm I'm not, you know.
Sure, so perhaps I can just throw out a couple of, just in response to Nora and then Kathleen. So, Nora, I acknowledge everything that you just said. I was a teacher, I can only imagine what it feels like to be a teacher right now. There is so much information, right? It is the technology, it is the change of schedule, it is the planning for a group of students that I haven't looked at, because I keep looking at my physical kids, right? I haven't. I look on occasion, if I hear someone speak this way, I look there. But there is an extreme amount of information. There's no doubt. So would teachers benefit from having additional professional development time? I'm sure they would. There's no doubt that, oh, I just heard something. There's no doubt that no doubt that they would. I think.
2020 and one of the worst years. That's good.
And that's exactly what's gonna happen. So there's no doubt that they would, and then I'll lose my train of thought and not remember the position that I wanted to take. And so I guess what I would say is, if this board would like to increase the number of days for teachers, then we have to decrease the number of days for students, which we have the privilege of doing this year, unlike any other year. So if this Board of Education says that that's what they would like us to do, there's no doubt that we can find opportunities for learning for our faculty during those days. I do think there's an element of preparation that parents have made for the opening of school, whether that's because of their own personal needs to return to work. And I also think there is going to be a part of this that they're going to have to jump in and say, okay, wait a minute, I'm not well prepared for this. I'm going to have to, and parents, I'm going to need to have to adjust. And there's going to have to be a level of forgiving from every, in vulnerability, there's no doubt, but a level of forgiving from everyone. To Kathleen's point, I probably have the most apprehensive about that. I'm most apprehensive about that model, and let me explain why. I think in grades, perhaps 7 through 12, maybe 6 through 12, I think you could do that. You can come in an asynchronous environment. I think for your elementary school children who have not seen their teacher, who don't even know, for our kindergarten children, don't even know what a teacher is maybe, right? You can't just say, type in noodle, starts with an N, because they don't even, some of them may not even know what the letter N is, right? Having taught kindergarten, it didn't matter what district you were in. Some kids knew the letter N, some kids knew how to read, and some kids thought that N was a square. And so all of that being said, and by the way, that's how we welcome them and we teach them that way. But to not have them in the physical world, I think is an added challenge that I don't think we're prepared to do. It was hard enough to do that in the spring after we had them for 7 months. So I would be more apprehensive about that than perhaps a delay if we felt that we needed to give our faculty more time. I do think that we've made some adjustments in our schedule, and that was feedback that our teachers gave us. Whether it was through the teachers union or them sharing out their concerns with their principals, they gave us that feedback, and probably within a couple of hours, maybe even less, we made the shift. So that, that's my position, and I think, I will say this, I think they're going to be nervous, no different than I am, up until the day that we hit go. I think they're going to be scared. I think they're going to think that they can't do it, no different than myself, that I would feel if I was in that classroom, until they hit go. Will they feel more confident, perhaps, a little bit, Nora, but there's a lot of uncertainty that's happening with all of this, and it's going to take a little bit of time for all of us to get adjusted, just as we are in this room, right? The next time we have a meeting in mid-September, it's going to be easier to remember that there's some here. It's going to be easier to remember where we need to sit. It's going to take a little bit of time. But I know that our teachers can do it. There's no doubt. That is one thing that I think is really obvious in this community, is that you have gems for teachers. And the positive energy and the fear, I'm sure, is evident.
Sean?
I'll just kind of extend out where we're at. So, we all acknowledge there's been a ton of work on the reopening committee. You've done a ton of work. It's incredible. We're 164 days since we closed schools. That's a long amount of preparation, a lot of money spent, a lot of momentum, a lot of training, a lot of protocol, and the science and data is pretty clear. I mean, we know what the numbers are to do what we're doing. And, you know, in fact, as I understand it, if Ed Briggs had his way, we'd be in school 5 days a week. And I know there's a lot of parents that would love to see an option for 5 days in-person learning, given the statistics we have today. So I think we're on the right track. We need to get the kids back learning. We lost, you know, a few months in the spring, and it wasn't an optimal learning experience. And I think we need to get these kids in and get them learning again.
I'm sorry, Ken?
I just had a question.
I'm sorry,
Comment-
this is a great place to start.
The comments come up a couple times. Why would, if we did give more time to teachers, why would that necessitate less time for students?
Because contractually, they've met their obligation in terms of school days. So now. if it
Teachers
were-
or students?
I'm sorry, teachers.
Okay.
So contractually, they met their obligation, Ken. So now, in order to increase a day of work, quote unquote, for them,
Sure.
we would have to take a day away from somewhere.
Okay. So I'm just wanting to get to the point. So if the teachers want more time, then perhaps they would have to make a concession on their contractual days.
That's correct, that would have to happen.
I have another one, but I'll wait till.
I'll just look up at the screen for a second. Karina or Liz, did either of you have anything you want to say? Karina, go ahead.
Sure, I just had a couple of questions. So there's about 800 students that would be getting dropped off, obviously in a hybrid, Dr. De Silva. Just to be clear, there's a plan for that increased traffic now?
Yeah, so we, each of our schools has developed their plan, and they've communicated that to families. Some of our schools have created videos as they safely drove while somebody was recording them, showing them how to enter, showing them how to exit. They've communicated that out to families, either again in video or verbally, and we've also met with our school resource officers to share out what those plans are. So while there'll be a number, so it's hybrid, right? So there'll be almost perhaps double in some schools of what they would have expected from drop-offs, pickups, but in theory, it might actually feel the same because it's a hybrid. Up until September 29th, just remember, we in the K-8 plan, we are intending to get back to school if all things go well at the end of the month.
My other question is about buses and running the buses with, up to 1,475 less students. We would still run all those bus runs. Are we responsible for fueling all those buses then as well?
I'll let Dawn
And the
speak
cost
to the
of
buses,
that?
but my answer would be yes and yes. Dawn, do you want to speak to that?
That is true. That is correct, Karina. We need to have a seat on a bus for every one of the students. At any time that the decision to come back to school, to participate and ride a bus could change. And therefore, the way the routes are set, we drive by just about everyone's house. We may not necessarily stop at those houses, but we do have to have them on the routes. And therefore, we do have to have the fuel in the buses in order to do that.
I understand that. I just see there was an opportunity possibly to save on fuel, and fuel is expensive. And I know a lot of people saw the reports of how much cleaner the air was when a lot of less cars and buses and things were running. So just like a lot of people referenced fresh air and breathing as they were speaking. So it did make me think of that as far as fuel. Just something to think about going forward in this hybrid. And do we have, when we're talking about a delay or not a delay, and people speaking out in the community, do we have a feeling about a plan for families who may be struggling, children who may be struggling in a hybrid virtual model, the stress on the family, the stress on the teachers, and we always talk about social emotional support. It sounds like the adults need it as well to best support the children. Is there a plan in the reopening for how to collect that feedback in the best interest of the children. That was my only hesitation on a delay, is I don't have the information on the status of the kids and how the families are coping.
So I'll let Dr. Hanaway speak about some of the work around the social emotional learning. She was on a crash course today at the high school running 3 sessions for faculty, not only for their own self-care, but how to support students as they transition back. So I'll let Dr. Hanaway speak to that. Just in terms of a pulse though, Ms. Drake, is that for me it varies in terms of the feedback that I receive from families, from everyone. To be honest, if you were to say to me today, what do the majority of our families want to do? It just depends. And likely if I were to poll people, right, that everybody has a different opinion. And sometimes the opinion just a slight subtle difference, but there is a lot of opinions. And so some families are saying, I need to get my child back because he or she is anxious without being in school. Other families are saying, I need to keep my child home because he or she is anxious about coming to school. So there appears to be a lot of, and again, there's subtle differences with families and their needs and a lot of different variables. But Dr. Hanaway will speak to how to tend to them once they arrive, whether it's there, here, or the kids that are always there.
So we've been receiving a tremendous amount of feedback from families about just what Dr. De Silva is saying, kids in different places upon return, not only with their new, in many cases, new teachers, but also knowing that they had a disruption and a lack of closure with teachers from last school year. So what we've really focused on is the notion of developing more than ever, not that it isn't important every year, but this year more than ever, building classroom community and having students have a sense of belonging and that connection with adults. Not just the first week, not just to get back to know you, that all roads have to lead to Rome no matter what they're doing. And I mean, in talking at your highest AP levels, everything has to lead back to building a classroom community right now, because if students don't feel that level of safety, we're not going to know what's going on with them, they're not going to communicate with us as freely, and we're not going to be able to meet their needs. And so that's been my overarching message as it relates to social emotional. We could do 100 different strategies. It's going to depend on how the kids are presenting in front of you. But if you don't have classroom community, number one on the mind, then everything else is going to fall apart. And that doesn't mean that academics go by the wayside. There's many kids walking in who the thing that will make them feel most, quote, normal again is to jump into heavy academics. And that's fine, but to the degree that they also need to know that there's going to be unexpected changes, and to help them wade through it, they have to feel part of the community, and they also have to feel like there's adults who know them early on. And so that requires a lot of intentionality by the teacher in order to be able, Karina, to your point, to say, how do I know what they need? How do I know if they're struggling? How do I know if the hybrid is affecting them in specific ways? And parents are going to feel more comfortable reaching out to the teacher if they hear the kids coming home speaking specifically to what's going on in their classroom. So that's been a huge focus of our social emotional supports and training.
Thank you.
Ms. Vogel, did you have any questions? I'm sorry, I just want to make sure you have a chance to speak since I can't see you. We'll go back later. Nora, I know you had something.
Okay, I just had 3 other questions, clarifications sort of. But the first one is, Dr. De Silva, you mentioned that one of the changes was in order to create a dedicated time for teachers to work with the in-school population, right? So maybe I understood this wrong, but so cohort A, which begins in school on August 31st at the high school, okay, grades 10 to 12, cohort A, will not have a dedicated teacher time in class because the teachers will also be teaching the online learners, correct?
No, I think that I have to pull up my communication, their dates are different.
Right.
Yeah.
Because of freshman orientation, they're a day behind everybody else as it relates to those first 2 asynchronous days.
Okay.
So their asynchronous days, right, are the 28th and the 31st.
Correct.
because freshman orientation takes up the 27th. So B will have their asynchronous day on the 28th. A will have, no?
Well, cohort A at the high school,
Mhm.
everyone beside freshmen,
Mm-hmm.
they don't start in school till the 31st.
Right.
Right. So will that day, on the 31st, will teachers also be teaching the kids at home?
No, that's an asynchronous day.
Okay.
Mhm.
So
Just
that's,
their dates are different.
Yeah, they're just one day shifted because of freshman orientation on the 27th.
all right. So then, the other question is, and I know Ms. Ewing will get to this a little bit more, but I guess I'm wondering, as you said, teachers are ready to go, and I believe that teachers are putting on a brave face, as much as possible. But, with the abundance of teachers resigning and retiring, and I don't know yet how many teachers are taking like family medical leave due to COVID, I'm wondering, and maybe you can't answer this yet, how many classrooms will start with a substitute rather than a certified teacher? And how optimal is that for students returning?
Karen could give you those numbers. Some of them may start off with a substitute that is a certified teacher. Some of them may start off with a substitute. In terms of the number of classrooms, I'm not sure that we'll know it really until closer, because we will work the next 3 days to do that. That said, I just to your earlier point, Nora, and I'm not sure if you're trying to make the connection. If you are, then this will help. If not, then it doesn't matter. That won't change necessarily in terms of a week or a week and a half from now. In terms of us being able, because those people would have resigned. It wasn't the week that made them the difference. It could have been the position that the district may have taken in terms of approving or not approving some of those requests based on the guidelines that we have in terms of what we can approve and what we can't. So when Karen gets to that, some parts of that may be answered.
Right, but in truth, another week would allow you to interview and hire more people.
Possibly, yes, yeah. There's no, where it's crunch time, Nora, yeah, there's no, yeah, if you gave me a week, for sure.
And then I just had one other question, and that is, mostly for parents out there, can you clarify how a day will look for a teacher who's meeting the needs of 10 in-school kids, 10 learners from home, and say 3 full-time distance learners? How does that day look?
So if you can picture, I'll look at an elementary perspective perhaps, because I actually just met with a team of teachers where we started to plan for this. This was actually early on. But just to think about cohort A, right, then we have cohort B, and then let's just say our next cohort is cohort C. Those are our digital kids. So our C are combined with A and B, because they're part of A's digital, and they're also part of B's digital. So there's really nothing different for cohort C except for those first 2 days. Because in theory, whatever we plan for that asynchronous group would have been the same, except we have this other group of C that's always digital, right? So they never get that physical experience. So they're basically a part of A and B, so nothing changes for that group. C.
Yeah.
So nothing changes. They're just whatever A happens for A, that's what's happening for them when they're online, and whatever's happening for B, that's part of their experience as well. So in a regular school day, it does depend by level, it depends on how they plan, but essentially you're streaming. So they're just like what's happening now, is we're streaming into a group of students that are on our digital experience. They're joining a morning meeting, they're joining the 15 minutes of a mini lesson, and then they're independently working. So if I'm a digital kid, I'm watching my teacher for 15 minutes. The teacher has to create, alongside her teammates, protocols, right? Because it's no different than I'm not tending to this group here, so I have to establish what our protocols are going to be very early on. But I might be teaching a mini lesson, and then kids are going off and independently practicing in their workbook. And so if I'm a digital kid, I'm independently practicing here, and my teacher is saying, as an example, Karina, how's it going there? Okay, Karina, can you lift up your workbook? Karina, Eyes on me. So she has a protocol in which to attend that. If this group is part of a small group, so Karina may join a group with Ken and Rachel in small group, where I'm bringing, instead of my webcam, I'm actually bringing a laptop with Ken and Rachel as I teach. There's a lot of small details. There's no doubt, Nora. There's a lot of small details. And the best suggestion that I've had for our teachers is to almost backward design. Think about how you would normally teach your first 6 weeks of school, your first week of school. Now think about what that looks like with a group of students that can't touch, that can't be a part of a circle, right? They have to start thinking in that way. They're gonna be taking mask breaks, right? What happens to the digital kids when they're taking mask breaks? That's a time when the digital kids need to go take a break too, right? So I'm gonna see you back here in 10 minutes. What does 10 minutes look like for a first grader when they don't know what 10 minutes is, right? When your laptop says 9, 5, 7, I want you to come back because we're gonna go take a break, right? So all of those small details and nuances, they're not gonna be perfect at the start of the year, but that's what it'll look like. It's literally taking this screen that I have here. And why was this important? Because we have a group of students, 675 of them to start, possibly more, that can possibly come in and out of the classroom, right? So those students can decide within 72 hours that they're going to join this classroom. They can't be on an asynchronous environment and not having access to the same content that everybody else is. So that's why live streaming made a lot of sense for all, and for the planning purposes. So the planning for our teachers isn't necessarily the content, it's how to adjust the content for a group of students that aren't physically there. It's complicated, there's no doubt, and it's different. But it's the best effort that we can make in a very difficult circumstance to bring children into a synchronous environment with a live teacher and some type of sense of community. At least until September 29th or possibly the first 45 days. And we'll see how layering the mitigating measures will support a transition to 5 full days. Sorry to pick on you, Karina. I promise I wouldn't do that in real life.
Okay.
But it does require, it's a whole other way of teaching. And I'm sure day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 won't be perfect for anyone. And our teachers need to feel comfortable and our parents need to understand that it's going to be part of the experience. I guarantee they will get better. We will all get better. And smarter around it and thinking about the tools and the tricks.
Other board questions? I was wondering, so if we talk about 675 remote learners, temporary remote learners, how does that break out by level or by grade? Are we seeing, certain grades where it's are affected more?
That's a good question. I haven't disaggregated that data in any particular way. I can find that out for you. I have it in front of me, but I don't want to.
It's more a curiosity, but I have to imagine it'll especially help with the distancing in the classrooms and stuff, because if you've already got your cohorts, you split up the classes in half, and then you've got.
Well, you bring up a good point, a challenge. So now that you brought that up, here's an example of a challenge. Is that I have a class at one of our elementary schools that had, they split the cohorts by alpha, right? They needed siblings to go together, and that sort of not the sibling group and then the non-sibling group. So they did alpha and then siblings. Well then, just by stroke of interesting luck, the non-sibling group has the majority of temporary remote learners. So we have a cohort of 11 and we have a cohort of 4. Okay, so that feels quite uneven, right? We can't shift the 11 because they are siblings. So now what we need to do is we need to ask those families that if we can, right? So if it doesn't make a difference for your family, because for some families it may not. It's not necessary to have, and may actually further complicate things to have all 3 siblings in the house at one time, or 2 siblings. They may be willing to make that adjustment. But that's one of the reasons that the shifting of the temporary remote learners is complicated, And we really ask that parents think thoughtfully about making the shift going back and forth. So that principal may very well be able to balance that cohort a little bit more, or may not, right? So now that the parent knows the children in their class, maybe, you know what, I'd love my kids to be together, but I know little Susie would really like to be with Sean, and because they're in different cohorts, I'll make the shift, right? So we'll have to start reaching out so that that'll happen probably if it didn't already today and tomorrow. But there may very well be cohorts that are not balanced. There may be a cohort of 11 and a cohort of 4. And while that's not perfect, it's smaller, it serves the purpose of why we cohort it. It's not ideal for the 4 kids that don't have quote-unquote larger peer group, but by the September 29th, hopefully the group will be larger, but ultimately I don't know that we can make that many changes.
Any other questions regarding reopening?
I just have one other question. It's kind of a follow-up to the question, because wasn't really speaking necessarily about the students alone in their support. I know there's a presentation at the library with professionals. I'm asking about adults who find themselves overwhelmed, and they're partnering teachers and parents. And when that happens, if we have a plan of support, something planned for that. Whether we just have resources that are on our website, whether we tapped into our community, our mental health professionals. I know that Doug Burrill led parenting circles in the past that were beneficial for people to just have that support group and a network of other parents who they could speak to and feel that they were connected to if we're back virtual and when in a hybrid and all the things that are happening in our adult lives. That was more my thought or my question.
So Ms. Drake, this past spring, we did actually through Dr. Hanaway's office, we did run parent sessions. There's no doubt that we'll begin to plan for those. Haven't yet, but there's no doubt. Again, the session that Dr. Hanaway ran, for example, today, was also focused on the adult, the teacher side, not necessarily the parent side. Did I remember Dr. Hanaway?
Yeah, it was focused on really teachers taking care of themselves, taking care of each other and kids. But in addition to the large group events, what we ran in smaller pockets last year was just that, Karina. We ran parent groups, specifically at the secondary level for parents with either similar type things to talk through or parents just looking for more resources. I think if we were back in a full-blown virtual model, that kind of support at the individual building level will have to increase. I'm trying not, because I think she's there. Will have to increase because we know that families need it. And so the trial runs that we did with that last spring at the middle and high school levels was very successful. And so if we find ourselves in a full virtual model again, we'll be offering sessions like that. We have partnered with the Department of Social Services and the Ridgefield Youth Service Bureau and their social services as well. And so ideally, that's a good point to bring up, is that we would do something collective together, either to divide and conquer out there or to just help parents have more options to choose from.
That's great, thank you.
To follow up on Karina, even more mundane than the bigger angst issues and the support issues, as going forward, and you may already have done that because I'm not a parent in the school, is the language of school has changed so much from when the parents, even these younger parents, were in school. Are there sort of just things on websites or things to go to, so when the kid says, that's not how my teacher does it, and the parent's supporting, some language, some cheat sheets, for lack of a better term, so that not as much tension is being caused.
Sure.
Just, that's something to think about. I mean, that's one more thing, but
No, that's okay.
teams can think about it.
We're glad to think about one more thing.
I have one more question, Dr. DeSilva. You talked about the core group getting together at 12:30 on Fridays to look at the metrics. I guess that came out the prior evening, correct?
Yes.
So some of that works out nicely with your Friday communications. Is that kind of, if there were to be a shift between the different models, so let's say we went from low risk to medium, moderate risk, would that be something, so you would have your meeting in the afternoon, you'd be able to communicate that out in your Friday things for a change on Monday? I mean, is that the?
I would hope that we would never be in that type of
Okay.
position to have to turn it around that quickly. I hope. Having said that, You never know with the circumstances, you all know from this past spring. But the intention is not necessarily to send out a Friday communication that would indicate a change, but rather just timing wise, because what we noticed, for example, this past weekend, is we were hearing things, and we didn't, even the data that we looked at today, for example, was data from Thursday, not from the weekend. The data that we had from the weekend was informal data. So, which was fine, it didn't change things for us, but that Thursday gives us the most recent data, and then we can, if there's any decision to be made, we can start planning for it, hopefully not last minute, but certainly communicate it to families.
I guess my question goes to how long would parents have to be able to adjust, to be communicated to and then adjust to a change in the model?
Our reopening
Yes.
plan does include for different levels of communication, so if there was an urgent communication, while it could be included in the weekly update, it likely would not just be included in the weekly
Yeah,
update.
right.
There would be a separate, clear communication just about that to the community. But, you know, I don't know that we could say exactly how much time, lead time, we would be able to provide.
Yeah. The one thing that I'm making efforts to do, it hasn't necessarily worked out, has been to just communicate once a week so that families know when to expect it, let's just say Fridays. Just when to expect that communication. I've had to send out some on Chromebooks and things like that in between, but that Friday communication, in the routine of the Friday communication, so the parents didn't know that somewhere between, you know, the start of the day and midnight, they can look there for any updates that might be happening in the coming week. You know, hopefully will help, but it really is hard to tell, and things change as frequently as we start to draft.
Things change, but I have to imagine that, in terms of some of those metrics changing, getting up to that magical number of 10 or something, that's not, I don't think it would happen overnight, so there would at least be a few
No,
days
right,
where there's
no.
some kind of indicator beforehand.
Right.
One would expect, for example, the information coming out Thursday may be up a little bit, given the numbers in Danbury last weekend. But even keep in mind, if we did come up to the 10 threshold, that would still indicate a hybrid model,
Right, okay.
where we are right now.
So the only shift in that particular case, to Aaron's point, would be that if we shifted into a moderate scenario for us in our reopening plan, Wednesdays becomes a clean day. So it would be a shift for families in terms of what their care might look like if it happened in the month of September.
The threshold for moderate is 25, you said?
The threshold for moderate is 10.
It's
Yeah, and right now we're at 3 point.
so roughly 3%
3.2.
increase.
Yeah.
8.
And can I just ask, what are the other towns that are in that region that we're looking at that we're?
It's all of Fairfield County. It includes Bridgeport, Norwalk, Stamford, Greenwich, Danbury. It's a large section.
It's large.
It includes about 1 million people.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
okay.
And it was
And very different populations too.
very different populations. And the statistic was designed that way so that if you had small blips in the data town by town, if you were in some more rural communities, that wouldn't necessarily indicate that a smaller community should close its schools. But, you know, in the case of Danbury, the Department of Public Health put out a specific alert just for Danbury, and I believe that informed their decision in terms of, you know, going remote learning. So there could be a potential scenario where, God forbid, we had an outbreak in Ridgefield that may cause us to locally take a closer look, and even though the Fairfield County numbers may be low, we might still make a change based on that. But that would all be in consultation with Ed Briggs and Dr. Ahern. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we move on to another agenda item, is any other board comments, questions? Well, I know it's been said quite a bit, but thank you. Thank you for everything. This has been quite a summer, quite a lot of planning, and it shows. And thank you so much.
I'm smiling kind of massive.
Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, which is the non-lapsing account resolution with the Board of Finance. So I will just give a little bit of background, and please, Jonathan, Dr. De Silva, and John, you were on the meeting with the Board of Finance last week, so if I miss anything, please feel free to fill in. But the Board of Finance adopted a resolution regarding establishing a carryover account last Tuesday, August 18th. I know our board, looked at that resolution and drafted that resolution in our last meeting, so you all are familiar with that. Rachel, at that time, you had a question about considerations of the offsets. I think it was like the fourth bullet point actually in the draft resolution. And that was specifically about if we get grants or other funds and offsetting of that. So the chair of the Board of Finance clarified that the offsets, what they were looking at was contemplating CARES funding and other state funds, but not necessarily FEMA. He did allude to the fact that they think that FEMA will take a long time to come back, and it would also be going to the town. So basically, if we get grants or funds, if we, the Board of Education, receive grants or funds, we must spend that money first on our COVID-related expenses prior to seeking reimbursement from the carryover account. So, I hope
So
that
the example
clarifies.
of that right now is if we were to receive this close to $300,000 of CARES money, we would use that prior.
Right, exactly. So other discussions at the meeting, there was, you'll notice the one big change, they did take our language of adding back in that establishing this carryover account does not preclude us asking for an appropriation. I think there was some discussion about that at the table, and they understand, especially after we shared some preliminary anticipated spending numbers with them, that there might be a need for us to go for a special appropriation later on, even with the carryover account. But one of the things that was added into the resolution and was a big discussion point was about adding in a cap on the carryover account. And there was some discussion about having a cap at all. There was also a discussion about what the cap itself should be. And I think the reasons for that, I did hear, we don't want, the Board of Finance wanted to make sure that it wasn't perceived as a blank check for the Board of Education to spend on COVID-related funds. But I think some of the other questions around that were, the Board of Education this year, in our attempt to be transparent and in our attempt to give the Board of Finance information in a timely basis, we actually approved we reviewed our end of year funds from June 30th. We reviewed them in July. Now, the Board of Education doesn't typically even meet in July. So the numbers that we had that we were working off of in July, and we ultimately, I think, approved in our early August meeting, were based on, were earlier in time, a snapshot earlier in time than we typically would have approved our end of year funds, and that we typically would have told the Board of Finance about. So typically, we would actually be voting in this meeting on our June 30th end of year funds and then give that to the Board of Finance. But in an attempt to let them know what the surplus was earlier, we gave them those numbers based off of what our numbers were in July. Those numbers have gone up as we've closed encumbrances, so Dawn, please feel free to fill in. As we've closed encumbrances, and actually by September 1st, that's I believe the numbers that we have to have that we report to the state. So anyway, so there was some confusion, I think, at the Board of Finance table about what is our surplus going to be, because it had grown a little bit since those July numbers. So because of that, I think they felt that they wanted to be able to put a cap on. So the cap was set at $700,000, which we know we've pretty much already spent most of that. But again, as Dr. De Silva referenced, the fact that hopefully we have some additional funds coming in that we can utilize first. Let's see, anything else on that piece of it, on the cap or on the end of year funds? No, okay.
They don't need to calculate has much of an effect, because they set the cap at 700, which is about where we are, or slightly higher. Slightly higher than we were that Tuesday night. So it's really not much of a cap, doesn't really have much of an effect as far as we know at this point.
Right, exactly. And again, there was, I think, an acknowledgement at the table that we, especially given some of the costs that we showed, that we may need to go for a special appropriation later on in the year. I think we can ask for up to $50,000 just of the Board of Finance, and they can grant us that. If it's anything over $50,000 under the charter, we would actually need to request that from the Board of Finance. They would need to vote on it. It would need to go to a town meeting and for vote by the town if we were to go down the appropriation route. That obviously, that is a big step for I don't remember how many board members were on the board when Dr. Baldwin was here, and we contemplated that after we started the school year in a freeze. And that is a very tricky, it was a good 3 or 4 months of us trying to decide whether we would need to ask for an appropriation or not. So that is certainly something that's not taken lightly as a step. There's obviously a lot of steps that are taken, but it's also not a light decision, and one that we would, we'll have to monitor for sure, and we will see where we go. All right, so that's the background on it. I think that what we can do, as I said, they adopted a resolution. The Board of Education, under our bylaws, is not allowed to adopt resolutions, but what we can do is we can agree to the terms of their resolution, which is what our motion will be about. So I'll read the motion language, if I can have someone move on that, and then a second. So do I have a motion that the Board of Education agree to the terms of the Board of Finance resolution concerning Board of Education budget carryover account for COVID-19 related costs that was approved Tuesday, August 18, 2020 by the Ridgefield Board of Finance? Ken, I saw your hand first, and Kathleen, would you like to second that?
I will.
Okay. Any discussion or questions? All right, well, let's move to a vote on that. All those in favor of agreeing to the terms of the Board of Finance resolution, please raise your hand. Okay. Liz? I think all right, we'll have to take that as a abstention, I think. So it'll be 8 in favor and 1 abstention. Okay, thank you, that passes. Okay, moving on to our next few discussion and possible action items. Ms. Drake, I'm going to turn it over to you, our policy chair.
Okay. We brought these to the board after our June meeting together. So the first is a smoking. Did anyone read through this again and have any comments?
We can make a motion then, if you want to make a motion to approve it, because these are the second reads, so we can approve these policies now. Green, do you want to make a motion for the policy?
Sure. I move that the board approve the policy 1331, smoking.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Nora? Any more discussion? All right, let's move to a vote. All those in favor of approving policy 1331, please raise your hand.
This is Liz, aye.
All right, thank you. Nine in favor. That passes. Great. Thank you. Karina, we'll move on to the next one, and I believe that Ms. Dewing is also going to be speaking about that as well. So, Karina, go ahead.
So policy 4112.51, employee and student teacher checks. We have a memo regarding this. I don't know if Dr. De Silva wants to speak to it, why some of the wording is changed and crossed out.
Yeah, so it's redlined. I'll actually turn it over to Karen, but the document is redlined on page 7 and 8, with changes mostly associated to Identigo.
Yes, and I can speak to that for sure. So prior to the subcommittee meeting in May, we were notified by the Connecticut State Police that they were moving to a new scan online way to report fingerprinting, and that would go into effect in February 2021. So to make sure that our policy would be in adherence to that, we had added that language subsequent to the May meeting, and then ultimately the Board of Ed meeting in June. We received correspondence from the State Connecticut Police that would no longer be occurring. So we wanted to make revisions, since we knew that that would not be in effect in February 21, to show that the status quo is what we have for the state of Connecticut at this point.
Do I have a motion to approve policy 4112.51 and 4212.51 employment checks? Do I have a motion? Oh, I'm going to jump. Okay. Do I have a second? Ken? Okay, any questions or discussion? All right, let's move on to a vote. All those in favor of approving policy 4112.51 and 4212.51, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay, that's all 9, unanimous. All right, Karina, on to the next policy.
Next policy is policy 4118.1, sex discrimination, Title IX. This is our second read.
Do I have a,
Should we take a motion to approve it?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Do you have a motion to approve policy I'm saying it wrong, policy 411, 8.1, sex discrimination, Title IX?
Do I have a second? Sean? Okay, any discussion? Questions? No? All right, we'll move on to a vote then. All those in favor of approving policy 4118.1, sex discrimination, Title IX, please raise your hand. Or say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Unanimous, thank you. That passes. Thank you, Karina. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is the Winter Garden Ice Arena contract. I don't know if Dr. DeSilva if this is you or Mr.
This is
Street.
all Mr. Street, so he is, his little paw is right there. I think he's about to join us. Go ahead, James.
Good evening, everyone, and my apologies, I believe I unmuted unintentionally earlier, so I think so my apologies for that. Yeah, I just wanted to present the Winter Garden Ice Arena contract for approval. This contract comes up every 5 years. We are looking for a renewal that would begin this coming school year and run through the 2025 season. This contract is essentially a renewal of the last contract, very, very few exceptions. One line in there that's a different line in regards to supervision of locker rooms and making sure that students are not allowed to use the locker rooms when a coach is not present. But other than that, it is a renewal almost word for word of our contract, which expired at the conclusion of this past season. So you have the contract with you in the packet, as well as some of the justification items as to why we have this ongoing relationship with the Winter Garden. They've been excellent partners for us and our boys and girls ice hockey programs for a long, long time now. And so really here to present that to you and answer any questions that you might have.
Ken, go ahead.
Just real quick, Dane, one of the, I think it was your last bullet on why you were recommending the contract, you said that there were reasonable cancellation and termination terms, specifically around COVID-19. But I did not see those in the contract. And in fact, there's a line that says there will be no reimbursement of contract fees for ice not used due to school cancellation. So the contract actually says opposite of what the recommendation was.
If you refer back to, and give me 1 second, I'm just working to open it up.
Yeah, sure.
So section 17 of the contract deals with cancellations.
Right.
And we work with the Winter Garden every year when it comes to cancellations on a day-to-day basis. For instance, if there's a day where we have a snow day, and we've had to cancel our practices as a result of canceling all after-school activities, they work with us to rearrange and give us make up ice time at a different point. So that's sort of an ongoing one. In terms of, what I would see as protection for us, if you want to view it that way in regards to COVID and whether or not we have a significant change to our winter season or a cancellation outright, I would go to section 20 there where it says section 21, termination. This agreement may be terminated by mutual agreement of both parties prior to the end of the 5-year term. If all ice slots covered under this agreement can be sold to a party agreed upon by Winter Garden Ice Arena LLC. And in speaking with Winter Garden officials, we already pay less per hour than the typical user for them. And anytime that we have ice, like if I go back to the example I just gave, where we are not able to fill a certain ice slot due to a school cancellation on a given day, they turn it around and rent it out to either their youth hockey groups or their other groups at a higher price. And so, there's no issue for them to be able to resell ice. So if we were to go to them, and especially in advance, and say, our season has been canceled, we need to terminate our contract, they would not be opposed to that because, quite frankly, they get a better rate when they rent to other groups.
Well, yeah, but to that point, if it's canceled, let's say because there is an increase in the COVID-19 outbreak, they're not going to be able to resell that ice time. And mutual agreement becomes, we're not going to pay you $100,000, and they're like, well, yes, you are going to pay us $100,000. It is, to have used a trite saying, an oral agreement's not worth the paper it's printed on. So, I mean, that's great that they say they're going to work with us, but without it being explicit in the contract, you know, but it, due to unforeseen circumstances, we have to cancel the season outright. We would likely not be the only school or team that would have to cancel. They would not be able to resell that ice hockey.
I'm asking to follow up on that is, if it were that serious, would it maybe be like it had been before, I used to be an ice mom, that the whole rink would have to shut down as well, and then what would happen? I think that would be the scenario, but.
A corollary to it.
Yeah.
Dane, could you circle back with Winter Garden and ask them if they could add a stipulation into the contract in the event that the school had to cancel due to COVID-related issues, if there's an amendment that they could add in here?
Sure, I'd be happy to circle back if there's particular language that you would like for me to, propose to them as an addendum or perhaps a section 22 here, given our circumstances this year. I'm happy to circle back to the Winter Garden and, get that in writing.
Ken, I think you bring up a good point. Are there others, so we won't take an action on this tonight, obviously, Dane will come back to us. Is there anything else in the contract that anybody saw that you might want Dane to address, or as he goes back? Go ahead, Ken.
I just have more of a general question regarding this and similar contracts. Are these reviewed by our legal counsel at all, or is this, we are doing that review?
No, most contracts are reviewed by our legal, contracts that are annual. Sometimes they don't necessarily need to be reviewed every annual time, but legal does review contracts.
So has this one been reviewed?
This one has not been reviewed. It was reviewed prior to this renewal, is my understanding. So the changes weren't enough to have it brought back, but we can certainly send it back.
Oh, no, it was more of a process question.
And actually, just on that, from a process standpoint, so the reason this comes before the Board of Education and not all contracts do is because under policy 3324.1, which is contracts with an annual cost in excess of $100,000 or a term in excess of 2 years will be approved by the board. So that's why this contract comes to us, but some of the others don't.
Right.
All right, so we will table that until the next meeting. Moving on, this is just so the Board of Education goals, especially because we have so many board members who were not with us at the end of last year when these Board of Education goals were established. We typically, actually by bylaw, we're supposed to review them in the second meeting in August, which this one is. But typically by now, we also would have had our retreat and we would have reviewed them and talked about district priorities. As we know, we've had to postpone that. We will be having that in a few weeks. So in keeping with our bylaws, we thought we would put it on the agenda for tonight, just for everybody just to take a look and review, especially for the board members who weren't with us last August. These goals are, as you see, are broad. They're intentionally very broad. Because again, the idea is that when we're together with the administration in our retreat and we're setting district priorities, that they align up to these goals, but that they're not so specific that they hamstring the district in terms of setting those district priorities with us. So just very quickly, the five and again, these were, we do not need to approve these tonight because last year when we approved them, we approved them for 3 years. So these go 2019 to 2022. We do have the opportunity to revise them at any point when we want to, and again, perhaps we'll want to after the retreat. I don't know. But as they stand right now, goal 1 is support the district priorities. Goal 2 is to promote and practice good stewardship for all district resources in a manner that supports a safe and healthy environment and optimizes student learning. Goal 3 is to develop RPS policies in support of the attainment of the district's strategic outcomes, mission, and vision of the graduate. Goal 4 is to improve communication, and goal 5 is to improve accountability. So again, in everything we do, we should keep those goals in mind. And I think what we'd also like to do is as we set those district priorities, just identify where those priorities fall in terms of which goals they support, as well as what some indicators of success could be, so that we can measure ourselves and evaluate ourselves in the year. I don't know if any of the board members who were with us last summer would like to.
I'd just like to say that, while I appreciate keeping them broad, when we do get to our retreat, I'd like to be able to work as a team to come up with more of a measure,
Yeah.
so that we can actually hold ourselves accountable to our, as they're written now, we can say, well, I feel like we did well, or I feel like we didn't do well, and there's nothing really to peg on.
Agreed, yeah, and that's certainly the goal, I agree.
I'd like to hear specifics that happened over the last year for each of these. So what did we measure last time, and that way we know how to go forward.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on that one?
All right. Items of information, staffing update.
So typically, do you mind if I start, Dr. Kisela?
Yeah, it's all you.
Okay, sure.
That list
So
is
as an item of information, typically there would not be a discussion about this, but obviously this is a unique times in the beginning of the school year. So certainly I want to answer any questions that the Board of Ed may have. So we have not presented the items of information since May, so the list is quite exhaustive. I do want to state that obviously we are not in typical times. So as we open the school year, I do have various situations of staffing needs. I will be opening, so as of today, the end of the day today, I still have 9 unfilled certified vacancies. We do have interviews even for tomorrow, so that number will change prior to opening. It is very typical that once we hit August, when a teacher resigns, they are required to give 30 days notice. I have seen a daily increase of people resigning now or retiring now without wanting to give that 30-day notice because of their health concerns. They're not going to another district, which makes it harder for me to require that they come. I do have some retirements and resignations in which they are giving their 30-day notice. So out of those 9, that does not mean that I will not have a person here on Thursday for kids. It's because they have given 30 days notice, and so we do have time in order to fill those positions. Some conversations are happening with employees as it relates to any accommodations under ADA or leave under FMLA. Those are not considered vacancies right now because they would not be vacating their position if they were granted such leave. And so we are looking at substitutes if possible. Again, to Dr. De Silva's point when Nora asked the question, a substitute does not necessarily mean that that person would not be certified. So we are, aggressively trying to make sure that we have all positions filled in time. We have made some hires, and those employees have to give 30 days to their district. So although we know they're coming, they too then may not be able to start exactly on Thursday. So there's many different scenarios. I heard somebody at 1 o'clock today, and that person can start tomorrow. So we're doing our best to make sure that we have the most talented, appropriate person in our positions to start on Thursday as best as we can.
Any board member questions? Go ahead, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Karen, because I know it's not a small feat by no means. I have a question about the social worker. Are we in motion to hire a second social worker for Ridgefield High School?
So we do. So right now there's, we have a full-time person at the high school who is a current employee, and we had a new budgeted position that has been filled. So there right now is just a part-time vacancy due to different circumstances, but we did hire that new position, yes.
So we still need to hire a part-time social worker?
So we've always had a fraction of a person, but right now the high school has always had one person on site. That person remains on site, and then the new position also now will remain on site. So they will have the 2 full-time positions that they're currently anticipated to have through the budget process. There's no loss to high school. They have their new position.
Because I just had looked back and a social worker has resigned May 31st.
Correct.
2020.
Correct, but I had a social worker in a different position in which we slotted into that. So that position is fully covered.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sean?
Yeah, I have no frame of reference from last year. Is this list double, triple, 50% higher than we used to? Especially since we're extending back to March.
Sure.
So you can't really go by that list because that list is
Right.
from so many months. If you want to say cumulatively at the end of the year, we're slightly higher. But I wouldn't say, what is different this year is the timing of when they come in. Normally I'd have many more of the retirements and resignations earlier. And I started off this spring and the beginning of the summer very slowly. And it's the timing now that I'm getting them daily now, which is not typical.
So you expect it to go up then?
Perhaps, I think if we delayed school, back to Nora's question, maybe I'd have more, but I think with people knowing school starting on Thursday, they're making their decisions now. But I don't have a crystal ball.
Ken?
On the 30-day notice, is that contractual?
It is a unspoken rule right now among districts when you hit 30 August. So, anybody, another district would say, I'm not going to hurt another district by taking their teacher at this time of year once we hit August 1st. So I can say you're not allowed to start at the other district until you've hired a replacement or that 30 days has lapsed. It is much more difficult when somebody is saying, I can't work because I'm fearful of my health. So yes, they're supposed to give 30 days. It's the obligation of how I can enforce that is the difference.
On the flip side, Ken, having been in the final interviews alongside Karen, every time the individual who's leaving their district has asked, do I have to? Karen has said, it is a courtesy that we want to offer to your district. So if they don't need you to and you're able to hire, great, we'll take you when you're ready or when they're ready. But we're asking you to give your district 30 days. We're expecting that you give your district 30 days. And I believe because of that practice, people have provided the same courtesy to us. When they can release them, they do, but not if they're not prepared.
Yeah, it was more, my question was more for the concern of
It's the
if
COVID.
a teacher on Thursday,
Yeah.
Wednesday night quits, and now
Yeah.
we're left with.
Yeah, and that is the difference due to COVID, absolutely.
Any other board questions regarding the staffing?
So in the future, if you recall, so we provide detailed as we're opening school so that you have a lot of information. If you recall, in future months, at the second board meeting of, the second meeting of each month, you'll receive just a summary of K through 12 and the total enrollment, not as specific by each school and grade level as you got tonight.
I did have one more. So the 9 unfilled certified vacancies, that does not include people that are requesting FMLA?
It has not yet, because those are not true vacancies.
Right.
They may be substitutes in which I have to look, and the length of time is unclear. So these are true where I'm hiring a replacement who will be a full-time employee.
Do you have an estimate or an educated guess on how many people might be, I mean, I presume
The
they
number
would
that
already have to
I'm
apply?
talking to right now. So the total is 5. They're not all direct classroom teachers, but direct classroom teachers is 4.
But not 40, so that would be.
4, just,
Right, that's what I'm saying, so
yeah.
double digits might be a bigger.
Correct. And I have been in touch with each of the schools that could be impacted by that to look at coverage. So some of the planning is to have coverage by our current teachers, so again, a certified person. Another one is to have a long-term sub who is certified. So we are doing our best, as I said, to make sure that we have as many certified people in those as we begin the year and determine if there's going to be a length of absence or not.
And does that FMLA, does that cover that Family First Coronavirus Act, which is one about childcare issues?
Yeah, so right now, I am in conversations with employees about that, so I'm only talking about their own personal medical. The one for the Family First, or FMLA Plus, For childcare, right now, there's only one teacher that is potentially getting impacted by that, and then I have approximately 5 paras that are impacted by that. So again, ratio to my population, it's not as significant as it potentially was in the number of conversations I had with people.
Thank you. Any other questions regarding the staffing report? And the enrollment report?
And I'm sorry, I talked about enrollment.
That's okay, no, I know,
I'm
that's
sorry,
okay.
sorry. So what I'm saying is you're not going to see exactly what you see in the future meeting, so we'll go to that. But so just some highlights. So this is our detailed, how we really look at our staffing versus our enrollment. So once we complete the staffing, which has already been done, and how many, particularly at the elementary level, the number of classroom teachers we have, that's not going to change regardless of the enrollment, so that's why you're not going to see that again. So you will see that we are approximately 29 students, this was as of Friday, under our projections. So if you recall, every November, Malone and McBroom provides us an enrollment projection. That's how we develop our budget and then determine how many teachers we need across the district, particularly at the elementary level. So we are running 29 students under, but you will see that we are 2 FTE under our projections, which is great news for the district right now. The middle school is running almost exactly at projections. And then I will be honest, what is surprising is the high school. So the high school is under by 52 students. So typically we see the high school over until school starts, because many students may leave, but their parents do not withdraw them. So that is the one anomaly that I will say in the 15 years I've done this, that I've not seen the high school run under this time of year until we start. So overall, 80 students under projections. That does change daily. So we typically do monitor that the first 5 days of school. And then, as you know, our official numbers will be on October 1st.
Question on the high school.
Well, go ahead, Jim.
This shows our projection having an increase from prior year. I thought that all of the projections are showing a steady decrease in the high school. Was this an anomaly for this year to have a big increase?
So I'll have to look into that, because that is not from projection to projection, but from actual to projection. So we always have to go back and remember what we're comparing. So I know what you're saying, Jonathan, but I don't know if that was from projection each year to projection each year for that decline versus what our actual was last year to projection. Does that make sense?
Sort of. But if you look above the 2 middle schools, the 1920 actuals, then the 2021 projections were slightly lower.
Right.
The high school is showing an increase in projections. I just know.
Yeah, so we have to go back again for that, because that does not show what 1920 projections were, what Malone and McBroom had projected at that time. This is only going from what we actually had, which there's always variation, to what they projected next year. So it's a good question. I'm just saying that data right in front of you won't answer that, so I can't answer that off the top of my head.
When is the last date when, for some of these projections, particularly for the elementary school, there's some classrooms that are quite small and 1 or 2 that are quite large. Is it set now that we've hired so nothing will change?
In terms of staffing?
In terms of staffing, because that could help with if the reality is 5 children don't show up, you'd have a teacher that you may be able to use.
So we wouldn't change, in particular at the elementary school, we wouldn't change.
At this point?
At this point.
Okay.
Especially so close to this.
Yeah.
This was maybe
So-
a week and a half ago.
Yeah,
perhaps, but-
So these are set? Okay.
Yep, so what we do is we always determine a drop dead date, that when a child receives who their classroom teacher is going to be in their notice,
Oh, okay.
that's where we leave it, whether we go up or down.
Thank you. I was just thinking it could help you.
Yeah. I know. There are times where our enrollment has increased, where we come back to the board to look at any type of, how we could rectify that if we go over class size maximums. But as of now, once we establish those classes, we keep those classes.
Okay, thank you. So what we've seen and we've heard about in the paper, we even heard about the Board of Finance meeting the other, last week, you know, about the housing in town, and obviously a lot of houses coming off the market, probably a lot of families moving in, fleeing the city, but that doesn't seem to be reflected so much in like a huge increase in our numbers, or am I missing something, or we might have an outflux as well?
So they're, right, because what you might not see here is the number of, so the number of students that have withdrawn to homeschool
Right.
are not here. So let's just say last week, for example, I believe between Wednesday and Thursday, I may have had 20 new students coming in, but I may have also had 6 students who withdrew to be homeschooled. So that figure we haven't talked about tonight. We talked about the temporary remote kids, but we did not talk about
That
homeschool
was the
kids.
question,
And we did
okay.
see, well, I won't say an increase because I don't know what the homeschooling end was prior to this school year, but in my experience, I have not seen a number of the number of homeschooling children as high as it appears to be here. But again, there's a lot going on that could indicate why that is.
What is that number?
Say it one more time.
What is that number?
I don't know the exact number of withdrawals, but I know that last week, for example, I had about 5 for homeschool. I can get you that number if you'd like for
I think it'd be helpful.
the next board meeting. Sure, I can do that.
Because I wondered for homeschool, I know our temporary remote learners, the 72-hour notice to be able to come back for our homeschoolers. I know we have a policy on it, I apologize, I didn't look it up before this, but what, if they were to decide to come back and be matriculated in our
At
school?
any time,
At
when
any
a parent
right?
whose child is homeschooled, they would just, so the difference is they actually withdraw. So they withdraw from school. It is typically a year that a parent will make that decision. It's uncommon that they would take them out, let's say, for 3 months or anything like that. But they typically withdraw and then would have to re-register back in their school. And hopefully, if the numbers are such like ours, they're not breaking a section or anything like that, or throwing a teacher over. Because we would not, obviously wouldn't break this far late in the game, but not throwing a teacher's classroom over the class guidelines. But most of the time, when parents withdraw, they choose to make that decision for the year. And I don't know what the practice is here, but as an assistant superintendent in that role, I would have met with each parent, identified the curriculum, checked mid-year on them, and then checked again at the end of the year just to be sure that we had a plan moving forward, and if the child was meeting success in the homeschool environment. So once everything stabilizes with reopening, that's something, if it's not in place, we'll put in place just to be sure that kids have what they need while they're being homeschooled, and we're double checking to be sure that the supports that we should be providing them, or parents should be providing, are there. Thank you.
And I would say that's important, because I can envision a family that, because they're anxious about, COVID, I can see them pulling, homeschooling for 3 months or 6 months until they're comfortable, until, whatever they're relying on a vaccine, or they just want to get used to the new normal. And so while that may not historically be what happens,
It might be the
I can
same.
envision that.
Yeah, you're not right. You're not wrong. That actually might be the case. But the checking in is important as well,
Yeah, I like
because
that.
depending
Great.
upon, we're here to provide education. That's what public schools do, and parents can choose to withdraw, but they do have to comply with what the state is requiring in terms of an educational experience for their child. So we just want to be sure that the parents understand that, have access to what they need, and that the child can be successful, because when they transition back in, we want to be sure that that's an easy transition or a smooth transition for them.
That's great.
Any other board questions or comments on the enrollment update? Thank you, Mr. Wang. Moving on, item 6, representative reports. I believe we have Steve Rulin on for the NEA-R report. He's coming.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the time to address you. I'm Steve Rowland, the newly elected president of the NEA Richfield.
Steve, can you just raise your voice a little bit?
Sure.
Thanks.
Does it turn on? Okay. All right, Steve Rowland, the newly elected president of the NEA Richfield. Yes, I picked the perfect time to become president of the NEA Richfield. I would like to just start up by clearing up some misinformation that I gave at my convocation address. First, I was told by my colleagues that I stated I worked at East Ridge Cafe. I'd like to clarify that I actually worked at East Ridge Middle School and never worked at East Ridge Cafe. Secondly, I just want to give a heartfelt thank you to Sarah Kehoe from our negotiations team and a sincere apology for not mentioning her by name Wednesday. On to the NEA report. We returned to school on Wednesday with mixed emotions: excitement, confusion, enthusiasm, and much anxiety. We were worried about issues such as lack of PPE, technology equipment not yet installed, classrooms in disarray, more uncertainty than certainty. We were introduced to a lengthy list of new responsibilities around COVID protocols to keep our students safe, and we are committed to those protocols. PPE, tech equipment, and furniture movement issues are improving daily. We have been assured that continuing issues will resolve as we get closer to the start date. But as we work closer towards instructional days, anxiety is running high with one constant message from our membership: we need more time. We came back early to receive professional development and learning around safety and teaching. The instruction presented was well done. It was professional, reflecting a tremendous amount of work. To those who provided the learning, thank you. However, professional learning was somewhat abstract. Now we need to turn that abstract instruction into concrete action within the world of our classrooms. As the saying goes, the devil is in the details. We can create a plan, distribute it, and say follow, but any newly initiated plan must be constantly reflected on and adjusted to meet new situation. That takes time. Adaptations are necessary as teachers have to test and reflect on responses to new circumstances. It takes time. The message we are sending our members is this: make informed, reasonable decisions, be able to articulate your reasoning, develop a better solution if one is not working well. That also takes time. Time right now is a teacher's most precious commodity. Time to digest what our new work and learning environment will be, time to digest and test equipment and instructional methods. Quality education that Richfield has come to expect does not happen by accident. It takes dedicated teachers using time to be the best they can be for our students. School will be open for students on Thursday. That's not much time. We recognize the recent storm interrupted preparation time for both the district and teachers. The NEA Richfield has advocated for a delay to the student's start date to gain time. I do wish to give Dr. De Silva a sincere thank you on behalf of the membership in doing her best to help us through the first few obstacles we have encountered, and more so in helping to squeeze as much time as possible back to the teachers before Thursday. Are we ready for school Thursday? The answer is yes, we are. As professionals, we are ready to see and engage our students. Are we prepared for students? The answer is no for the majority of teachers. Over half of our members completed a survey for us at the NEA Richfield last week, and we found that 90% of those who responded were feeling unprepared and suffering from significant anxiety over all the new responsibilities around COVID protocols, as well as adjustments to instruction. Questions continue to outpace answers. When students arrive Thursday, they're going to be looking at us, not you or anyone else, for answers. We want to be prepared to give our students 100% of the experience. Where did the answer lie? Well, the answers are going to lie somewhere in the middle. We ask parents, students, administration to meet us in the middle, to work with us in creating the best school experience possible under these conditions. This requires communication, patience, understanding, and an open mind for change. I'm here to advocate for patience and cooperation from everyone: the board, administration, parents, students, and colleagues. Most crucially, time is needed, since most answers will, over time, be discovered by those working in the classroom daily. Ensuring the safety of our students is our first priority, followed by quality instruction. The Ridgefield teachers, Ridgefield teachers have been tasked with not only ensuring safety, but teaching 3 separate groups of students as one unit, a situation we have never encountered before. We stand ready to work next to the entire Ridgefield community to accomplish this. We are excited to be back in the classroom, doing what we love, teaching. To accomplish this, we only request the time needed to ensure a safe school environment and the time to design a rigorous yet enjoyable educational experience for our students. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 7, correspondence to the board. Public comment. Mr. Stecker, do we have any?
We do. Some of these actually look like questions that might be better answered directly by administration tomorrow, but I'll go ahead and read all these. First one is from Scott Honore, 75 Decorah Trail. Can you elaborate on any improvements made to enhance ventilation in RPS schools? Next comment is from Peggy Honore, 75 Decorah Trail. Is Ridgefield going to delay the start of school until after Labor Day? If not, why, especially in light of the facts surrounding towns have done so? Are there no concerns about the current outbreak in Danvers? Next comment is from Meredith Harris, 37 Christopher Road. Can we delay school or have everyone online for a week to check that the technology works and monitor numbers? Most schools in our area are delayed. Next one is from Mark Seaman, 36 Mimosa Circle. How large of a Danbury population are part of our RPS system, admins, teachers, staff, and students? This is an important concern given the close proximity we have to the COVID-19 outbreak in Danbury, necessitating their schools closing. Thank you. Next is Pamela Poutre, 76 Bogus Road. Sorry if I missed a part of the meeting where this was covered, but if my child will be participating in fall sports, how will he get to practice and games on days in which he has remote learning? Both parents will work full time. And next is Kimberly Bishop, 268 Silver Spring Road. Please consider delaying the start date of school. Most families I've spoken to agree. We want the teachers and schools to have all the time they need to welcome our children back into the safest possible environment. After watching the governor today, where he said after a question from the press that they are watching the greater Danbury area very closely to make sure that the spike does not spread to neighboring towns, I feel there is more reason to delay the start to give time to see that the spike doesn't occur in Michigan. That's all I have.
Thank you. All right, next item is correspondence report. Rita Drake.
Since our last regular meeting, we received 40 emails. The majority, almost all of them, are different questions or comments or feedback about reopening.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we have reached the conclusion of our meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I so moved.
Ken, do I have a second?
My second.
Kathleen, all those in favor, please raise your hand or say yes. Liz? All right, well, we were adjourned. 8-1. Thank you.
Very much so.